Okay, chapter 14, developing additional plan view elements. Um, I'd like to cover this chapter for a couple reasons. One, because I was a little confused when I first started using this technology, and you might be too, because you may have heard that when you develop that 3D model with the template, just like we just did, that it automatically draws your plan view element, which could then be used on the sheets. Normally what you would include in your design file, or some consultants call it your plan file. And so I would like to cover that. Anyway, I'm going to close this, and in order to do that, let's go ahead and open up the design file. There should not be anything in it, and then we're going to reference in a couple files. So I'm going to show you that that you can, especially like for like a phase one or feasibility study, or different things like this, that you could get by without drafting in a lot of your proposed edge of pavement and edge of shoulder, construction limits, all those type elements. You could get by without doing any drafting, and that's something to consider. The only thing is that I don't know that you end up with exactly what you want and how to go about showing it. So let me show you why I guess I would still recommend drafting in those plan view elements in your design file, your plan file. It's a great reference to be able to reference it. If you did your corridor before the plan, or that you can choose as to what order that you do things. And it's even possible with something called point controls to actually have the template follow your plan work. This will make a little bit more sense as you go on, but in any case, what we want to do is reference in the alignment and the corridor file. And then go ahead and do a fit view. And so, I'm sitting in the design file. So you could see that this looks really just like if you would have drawn it in the design file yourself. Now you'd probably end up turning some levels off that you would not want to show up in your sheets, such as like the corridor, the template. But notice when I turn that off, look at that, the construction limits are automated. And when we talk construction limits, sometimes there's confusion there. That's basically, think of it as where the back slope ties into the existing ground. Normally you have to develop your cross sections, and then you go in and you plot some points, and then it ends up being very segmented, that sort of thing. So you can see these are pretty clean construction limits. It also included this line. I think that's the yeah, there you go. That's the beauty too. When you hover over something, it tells you exactly what it is, because the feature definition was used, and so it knows exactly what that is. That's the left. Side slope ditch in. So that's probably the inside of the bottom of your ditch bottom. Here's a line here. That would be, I think this one had earth shoulders. So you can see that as I hover there. There's the edge of your earth shoulder, edge of your ag shoulder, edge of your HMA shoulder. You might want to include some of this in your design, but let's see if I can show this. This actually doesn't look too bad. Sometimes when you're in a curved area, some of this line work ends up looking maybe a little segmented. If I hover over that and I click on it, I see it's It's not really what you'd expect. It's not really like an arc, I don't believe, unless that, has changed. Um, so in any case, like I was saying, I still like, you may be able to get away with this, but I still like to draft um, in my line work myself. And then it really is a great check to, if you knew ahead of time that, what your pavement width is, your shoulder width, when you use your template, say, I've had situations where it was the wrong width, and you're looking at that 3D model, and you can't really tell maybe right away exactly what those widths are. I can show you some dynamic tools that you can use to check all those kinds of things, but it might not be super clear at first. So if I was to turn off the corridor and draw my plan view elements in myself and then reference it in, everything should be right on top of each other, should be looking good. So let's do that. If we're going to draw, what are we going to do first? We're going to set that feature definition, right? And so I'm going to go to the Geometry tab, Feature Definition Toolbar, and we may have covered some of this in previous chapters, but it doesn't hurt if we did to go over this again. Remember, we talked about looking up your proposed edge of pavement. And here's where, I guess we did talk about this, because we talked about copying parallel, that alignment, and the fact that for edge of pavement, edge of shoulder, those kinds of things, that I probably want to use the Open Roads linear tools, not if I hit drawing, the MicroStation tools, right? And I think in our example, we may have copied the entire alignment parallel. So instead, maybe this time we'll do a partial offset, or a ratio taper, variable taper. All these you'll absolutely use, very common. And so the way this works is I click on that alignment there, then I type in my offset of, say, 11 feet. And then once I do that, where do I want to start? Do I want that to be at the very beginning or not? Maybe you've got, you're tying into the existing pavement right here, and maybe you've got something unusual going on where that edge of pavement line isn't exactly parallel, or it might be. And so you need to, at this point, you end up deciding, like, if this was a MicroStation line, say for instance, and you were stopping back here somewhere, you would definitely just data point to accept that line, and maybe you had a known position here where you're going to stop, and that would be that. And then if later you decided that line was longer, you'd use your tools and extend it and things like this. Sometimes I have noticed that once you've done a certain amount of work, that you're not really able to use some of these tools for modifying these line lengths. And so here's a new concept, and something that's completely useful and doable. Let's say, for instance, you had some sort of intersection back here somewhere, and I'm just kind of sketching that in, right? And let's say we don't normally want to show that edge of pavement line through the intersection. So in the past, right, and you would come along and use your partial delete, say for instance, and you might clip out that line, and it would look just like that, right? And you start off with one line, now you have two lines. But let me show you how these lines are different. Notice when I hover over these lines that really, that's still one line. And it's only displaying on either side. And so these, what are these called? Intervals. And so I can actually use these intervals, in different ways. You'll see as we go. And I can modify even the interval. And you might say, well, why would you want to do that? I don't want that line underneath. I just want one line. In ORD, you'll find yourself targeting that edge of pavement, and maybe in your plan view you're not showing that edge of pavement that goes through that line, but you'll find that there are reasons why you do want that line to be there. Maybe when you're tying in that intersection later and you're targeting that edge of pavement, well, because you did it this way, because you went with the complete line through here, you used your microstation partial delete to eliminate parts of that line that are visual, and then you have kind of on top of those lines, so to speak, as many of these little intervals as you want, and those intervals are what displays and what you see, on the plan sheet. So, we'll get into this further later, but there's all these just, little concepts to know when you first get started with modeling. Let's talk maybe a little bit more about how some of these tools work, and maybe you're going to find that they work a little different, than what you're used to when you're drawing these plan view elements. And a lot of it comes down to design intent. A lot of it comes down to making it as efficient as possible for you in the future to make changes. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to add a paved shoulder and maybe an earth shoulder, whatever. So I'm going to drop down here. I'm going to select edge of shoulder, or shoulder. Let's see. Let me look through here. All right. So I guess it's just called shoulder. Shoulder HMA. Yeah. There we go. Okay. So let's go ahead and draft that shoulder. Now we know that we could do that in a couple different ways, right? So you might want to think, and this will matter later, you might want to think, okay, do I want that line to be created by copying it parallel to the edge of pavement, or do I want it to be parallel to the center line? Well, I guess they're both parallel, right? But what do you want to tie it to? Because it makes a difference. And let's show you that. Like, let's say you had a 4-foot shoulder, and I jump up there to that, say, partial offset, and I select that edge of pavement. Let's see, I guess I still had that set to 11. And like we said before, we can always go back and make that change. But what happened? What did I do here? I told the design, my design intent was for that shoulder to be 4 feet wide. And so is that what you want, or did you really want that shoulder to be, say, 15 feet off the edge off the center line? Because that makes a difference, because watch what happens when you change the width of that edge of pavement. Let's see, and I had to click on it extra time because it was white. Okay, so let's change it to something like something way out there, 16. Let's see what happens in that case. The edge of pavement got wider, but changing this number right here didn't just change the edge of pavement, it changed the shoulder also. And so why did it change the shoulder? And it changed the shoulder because you told it, your intention of this design is I want a 4-foot shoulder. You didn't say that I want the line to be 15 feet from the center line. So maybe we can redo this, and you can imagine what that's going to end up looking like here, right? I'll go ahead and set that to 15 this time. I'll run it from the center line. And let's see, well, I'll put this back to where it was at 11 feet. Okay, so now it looks exactly like it did before. And when you were a drafts person, right, there was only one way to do this. It didn't really matter. You're dealing with individual lines, where now there's all this intelligence built in. So when things happen that you don't expect, that's why I want you to know, why all these things are happening, and then show you that you're not just doing drafting anymore. That you really need to think about what is your intention here. And so if I change that 11 to 20, say for instance, just as you can imagine, that shoulder did not move. And why didn't the shoulder move? Because that shoulder's tied to the center line. It's not tied to the edge of pavement. And really, everything works like that. Especially when you're going back to when you use that feature definition and you have that persist snaps turned on, and you snap to something, and then you're telling it, my intention is to connect this line, and then I go make a change to some other line. It's going to continue to be connected depending on which snap did you use, perpendicular or something else. And so these are all good concepts to know. One of the more important ones, though, that I wanted to just mention, because like I said, it took me so long to figure this out, it just didn't make sense at first, because I thought that we no longer did any drafting in the plan view, especially for these type elements. Let me go ahead and turn that corridor back on, in fact. And you'll notice that because I was just messing around with the width, you're like, oh, wait a minute, these lines don't seem to be matching up, right? And that, that shows right away when you drop that corridor from whatever your template drops were. And that way you just make sure you are in sync. So let's leave it at that for plan view, and we'll move on.